Bonjour tout le monde, ça va bien? En tout cas, moi, je vais très, très bien. Je suis très heureuse d'être ici avec vous cet après-midi pour cette belle conversation que je vais avoir avec mon invité. Je tiens à remercier la Fondation Dynastie d'organiser à chaque année depuis un certain temps les Sommet Dynastie. Je vous remercie beaucoup pour l'invitation. Je me sens très reconnaissante et privilégiée d'être là. Très privilégiée d'animer cette première conversation devant vous, avec vous, parce qu'il va y avoir une période de questions tantôt. Et j'ai très, très hâte de vous entendre aussi sur le sujet que je vais partager avec mon invité, Dejha Carrington, avec qui je vais explorer comment l'économie collective peut être un levier pour les artistes, pour nous, pour vous, en particulier ceux qui sont issus des communautés noires. S'il vous plaît, aidez-moi à accueillir chaleureusement mon invité, Dejha Carrington. Un petit accueil chaleureux, s'il vous plaît. I wanted you to be here while I read your bio because it's impressive and I have to. Dejha Carrington est une praticienne et une leader dans le domaine des arts depuis plus de 20 ans. Elle est originaire de Montréal, graduée de l'école McGill. En 2017, elle cofonde Commissioner, un programme d'adhésion artistique qui aide les amateurs à collectionner les œuvres artistiques contemporaines de leur ville. En tant que directrice exécutive, elle a implanté cette initiative à Miami, Détroit, New York, Montréal, Mexico et la Nouvelle-Orléans. De 2015 à 2022, Dejha est vice-présidente des communications stratégiques de Young Arts, la fondation nationale dédiée à l'avancement des artistes. Elle a collaboré avec le Kimball Art Museum, la Biennale de Medellín en Colombie et l'Office national du film du Canada. Membre du CA du MapFound, un organisme national de finances des arts de la scène basée à New York, ainsi que de Black School, une école expérimentale à la Nouvelle-Orléans, consultante pour le programme Art in Public, place de Miami-Dade, du Centre for Black Visual Culture de l'Université de New York et du Centre for Global Black Studies de l'Université de Miami. Et pour couronner le tout, elle enseigne The Business of Art à la New World School of the Arts du Miami-Dade College. You have an astonishing and beautiful legacy. Thank you for being with us today, Dejha Carrington. Ça mérite une bonne main d'applaudissements.
Thank you so much for having me. Overwhelmed by the love, also overwhelmed to be in my city, the city that I love the most and that raised me. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for accepting the invitation. And you will realize that we know each other, so we cannot hide it. We won't. So it's kind of catching up, and also a great conversation about not only economy, but community, innovation, art, culture, and in our communities. What do you feel about that conversation?
Well, I think it's maybe one of the most important conversations we could be having today. When we look at the state of our world, I think we need to be in a place of absolute imagination. Amiri Baraka says that nothing has to be what it is. And so as we're looking toward problem solving, I think it's really important that we look toward artists and creatives, because if we can imagine it, then maybe we have a path toward radical advancement.
Mm-hmm. Me, personally, as a visual artist, host, social entrepreneur, it's a great conversation because it will, feed my process thought, and I think it's the same thing for you guys. Dejha, we know each other since our mid-20s.
Not that long ago.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's not that long ago,
Not that
like you
long
said.
ago.
Since our mid-20s, et déjà à l'époque, on était dans les balbutiements de cette communauté artistique et culturelle qui essayait de se définir ici, à Montréal, au Québec, dans une communauté très francophone. Tu es anglophone. Et tu as décidé, après avoir laissé beaucoup de traces dans la ville, on a collaboré sur beaucoup de projets pour la ville, tu as décidé de quitter. Et moi, de mon œil extérieur, je t'ai vu fleurir. Et ça, c'est la perception que j'ai. J'aimerais que tu nous expliques pourquoi tu as décidé de quitter Montréal. C'était dans quel contexte? Qu'est-ce que tu cherchais à manifester pour toi-même que peut-être tu n'arrivais pas à faire ici?
Dans le temps, je travaillais à l'Office national du film, which, as a director, and I'll switch back and forth if that's okay with y'all. As a director, I felt like I had hit a glass ceiling. And I have to say that I wanted to feel seen, and I also wanted to be compensated for the gifts that I was bringing to the table. And so I moved toward the US because I was hearing it in hip hop. I felt like there was a common language that I was seeing in contemporary art. And I just wanted to be in a market that was larger and felt like it was more reflective of me. But of course, that was then, because now having the benefit of retrospect, you know that you go toward the US and there's the same systems of inequity, right? There's the same trappings of capitalism. There's the same environment that could also make you feel like you hit a glass ceiling. So I felt like I hit a glass ceiling at National Film Board. I end up becoming a VP at a National Arts Foundation, one of the most respected in the country, in the US, and I still hit that glass ceiling. So the common denominator here is me. I need to be in a place where there are no ceilings at all. You know, and so now I can understand that while I was moving away from Montreal looking for something, that shift really had to come from me. And that's why I decided to build and to make something that was more values aligned, that would provide me and my community the abundance and the creative freedom that I was looking for, regardless of place, regardless of what already exists. And to really kind of lean into this idea of mobilizing resources in a way that felt supremely different. I do have to say, though, that it is Montreal that taught me how to do this. For all of my success in the US, it was growing up here and understanding friendship, understanding like allyship on the next level, understanding cooperative economics. Like we talk about feeling entitled. I felt entitled to accessing the arts because I grew up in the city. You walk down the street, you go to a festival, pay you admission for what? You know, like that's the attitude that I brought, right, to how I moved in my career in the US. And I think it's a lot around like this financial capacity to organize each other that I've been thinking about how to build my business.
Thank you. Thank you. If we go back to the original question, l'économie collective au service des artistes, innover pour financer et faire grandir sa créativité. I have to be honest, there are some keywords in that sentence that really, you know, m'a donné le goût de faire un peu de recherche par rapport à cette conversation. Il y a des mots comme économie, artiste, innover, financer, créativité. Comment tu arrives à faire du sens, toi, dans ta vie professionnelle, dans cette dimension? En fait, ce qu'on essaye de comprendre, c'est comment l'économie collective est un levier puissant pour nous en tant qu'artistes. Là, on se focus sur les artistes des communautés noires, mais moi, je pense que ça s'adresse à tous les artistes émergents ou marginalisés.
So I think, you know, there's many different cultures, if we look at across movements and geographies, that have looked at collective economics as a way to create more leverage or to build their own economy. If we look at how women have been marginalized right, and have figured out ways to create their own ecosystems. If we look at how farmers have done that as well, really what I'm talking about is maybe a sous or a partner or a collective savings plan. Today we call that crowdsourcing or a membership platform. But all of these ideas are really old ideas that people who have existed on the margins of the economy have figured out. And it looks like organizing your dollars and your resources outside of mainstream systems. To make this abstract idea a little bit more concrete, about 7 years ago, I created an organization, founded an organization called Commissioner. Commissioner is an art membership plan that helps people collect art and support artists in their communities. What we do is every year we open up 40 spots and we say, pay us $1,500. We collect a pool, which gives us about $60,000 because we have different membership levels as well. And from that, we'll commission 4 artists per year. Every artist has a $15,000 commission. Because we care about auditioned work, that means each one of our community members who have pooled in will receive a work. So if you can imagine that, maybe it's a Stanley Février or another artist. Why don't a few of us get together, put some money in a pot, and ask Stanley to create an edition? If we could create our own mixtape, if you will, it's not only so that we could own the work, and I'll get back to why owning or collecting is very important afterward in terms of being a stakeholder in the culture that's coming out of your community. But it also means that maybe when Stan Lee goes to another city or has an exhibition elsewhere, we can travel and support him there. Maybe it means that I'm calling a journalist because I used to work in PR, and you're calling your friend who also likes to collect, and you're calling your friend who might be on the board of the museum. And what we're doing is we're each using our own social and cultural capital to get behind the people we care about. It's looking at an activism model to organize around the people that we believe in. And it's also looking at an economic model that allows us to pool our resources in a way so that we could support artists together in a way that we may not be able to afford to alone. I should say, maybe, I've been doing this work for 7 years. We've now commissioned almost 50 artists, raised over $1 million, and placed more than 1,500 works in the hands of new and beginner collectors.
So it works.
It works. It works.
What I hear, you sharing that with us, is that sometimes innovation is going back to what used to work.
100%. I mean, the best innovator is nature. You know, nature creates these ecosystems and have these iterative components. If we look at the fern as a fractal, it's no different than the tree, no different than the forest. So if we start thinking and really focusing in on our communities and the people that we are with, we're able to build more expansively, more horizontally, and less from a place of systems of extraction.
What I hear is that what used to work still works, but Dejha, you left.
I did.
Is that part also of the equation?
Oh, wow, that's such an interesting question. I think so, because in leaving, I think I realized that I was going to be confronted with the same issues wherever I go. And I think I had to learn that lesson for myself. You know, that there you are wherever you go. And so I think that, it was a gift because I got to build a network, which was very important. But I got to do it from a space of like trust and having a solid foundation, which I was able to really lay here through friendship, through my family, through education. That was a gift. But leaving allowed me to build a stronger network, not only in the cities in which I've been able to travel to, but more globally. And I think maybe to come full circle, yes, it's all about you, but then there's also something about being able to observe how other cultures and other geographies and other communities are functioning, and to pay attention to where the differences are and where the similarities are, and who are the communities and the people who are there who are actively working toward a solution. So it's almost like a transnational approach, right? Where it's less about the boundary, and it's more about a movement or core values.
And you're definitely a leader of that movement, at least of the movements you create. And to create a movement as an artist, you need to have a quest, you know? What was your quest then? And is it the same today? Did it change? Why?
You know, I like to say that I've been doing the same job since I was like in 4th grade, to be honest. I have this memory of running for student council, and my mom and my sister were helping me make posters and, make buttons and create and draw and promote. And I think my work has always been at the intersection of bringing people together and supporting artists and finding a lot of storytelling as a through line. So, I think as an artist, yes, you need to have a quest, but I think there's also maybe a lightness of being that you could have, like a way that you might want to live your life and who you want to live it with. Like when I think about my own family even, my younger sister played violin at a very young age. My mom, although she would not consider herself an artist, I remember drawing horses with her at the table. My brother is a photographer. My older sister works in textiles. Not all of us make a living in the arts, but all of us have a life in the arts. So I think it's really about thinking about how you want to live your life, who you want to be surrounded with, what do you want to align with? And maybe that could be like a higher purpose.
Thank you. So, sometimes I ask myself, well, in order to find the right answer, you have to find the right questions, right? Mm-hmm. And I was about to ask you, what's what are you the most proud of? But no, for real, what I want to know is, where did you learn the most? What's your biggest failure?
Girl. Oh, man. Okay, well, failures are lessons.
Because if you're here, it's because you conquer it.
I think perhaps my biggest failure was not paying too much attention to the negative in different parts of my life. So I could say that now I understand, right, that it's really so important to surround yourself with positive energy, and that the brain will process negative feedback twice as much as it processes positive feedback. So I've learned to shift my energy from convincing people to just moving toward people who are already rocking with me, who already see me. And spending a lot more energy in places where I can feel celebrated, where I can celebrate people back, and where I don't feel like I'm living up to some arbitrary standard that's been set by somebody else, to which I will never reach anyway, because they're not checking for me, And so I think that is perhaps a lesson. The failure, right, I guess, wasn't so much a failing, but the realization that I was spending too much time in systems that were not designed for me to succeed. I don't know if that relates or that resonates, but
I relate. And now that, we're looking back, we're catching up, girl. That's so cool. What would you do differently?
Yeah. Well, in some ways, I think that I'm okay with the way things happened. I think that there's something about equanimity where you can just accept that you're in the present and move forward. That's really powerful, because it means that you get to harness everything that you've learned, all the times that you failed, into how you build your future. And I do think that I have a healthy appetite for failure, because I've been rejected so many times. You know, at one point, it felt like I was throwing spaghetti on the wall and just waiting to see what sticks. And that is really a creative life, you know. Lisa Lee, who I believe is in the room, and who I came up with learning about PR, really taught me how to pitch. And the game of pitching is to find alignment, so know who's writing about what companies are interested in, what kinds of partnerships, where do we find the most alignment. But the truth of it is you have to make an ask. And then sometimes people say no. But how do you internalize that no? Do you say, oh, I'm never going to go back to that journalist, or I'm never going to, ask that person again? No. That no means not yet. It means I'm not ready for your greatness. It means I'm not ready to accept this opportunity. And so that reframe, I think, is perhaps what you're hearing from me when you say, oh, what would you do differently? I'm like, no, I got to reframe this for my own mind, because it's not what can I do differently. That's past, that's done. It's really like, how do I move forward?
And how do you move forward?
You know what?
It's all about asking the right questions, right?
The right questions. You know, Commissioner, which is the art membership program that I've been telling you all about, we've really been moving at a very steady pace, commissioning 4 artists per year. We have a Miami Art Week program. We travel to 2 cities per year. I took a group of about 20 people to Montreal a couple of years ago. We always work with local artists and local curators. Our co-curator at the time was the wonderful Ingrid Denissin. And that idea of hyperlocalism has really been working for us. But we need to increase our operating budget. And so whereas in the past, we've relied mostly on membership to support and to finance the commission of work, we have built up enough of a solid name where I think we need to move into a space of asking for the $1 million, $5 million, $10 million gifts that are going to help us build the organization so it exists in perpetuity. If you can vision dream with me a little bit, right? Why do we care about museums? Well, we care about having work in museums because it means that there will always be a record, right? The museums are endowed. There will always be a record, always be a mark of that artist existing in that collection. So that beyond a time when any of us are here, people will remember that this person was creating at this time, and these were the environment or the conditions that were motivating them. Well, I would like for all of the artists that we commission to have that gift, which means that I need to be thinking about how to build an endowment for all of the artists that we're commissioning so that 10, 20, 100 years from now, people will say, there were a generation of people who organized around a group of artists to make sure that their stories would never be lost. We hear a lot about museums holding memory, but museums should not be the sole arbitrators or the keepers of our stories. We are each our own memory keepers, right? We hold the memories, we tell the stories, and often the work is about our own experience, which means it's very important that it exists in our own domestic spaces so that the stories that get told from a place of authenticity or lived experience or shared values. So if we can start decentralizing memory, I'm not saying that museums need to go away. It's a yes and start creating more systems of decentralization. That means that we can check each other on the history. And when a certain president say, oh, it never happened like that, or when a book says it never happened like that, well, there's enough of us who were there, enough of us who are participants, stakeholders in the work, stakeholders in the stories, where we can challenge it, and maybe even challenge each other. And I think that's the foundation of art, right? It's giving us more language, more points of connection from different vantage points. And so that, to me, is really the next evolution of commissioner. How can I make sure that not only is the organization around when I have moved on to other areas, because I do think that's a possibility. We don't always have to be in one place at one time, right? We get to move on, we get to sunset. But beyond the organization, how can I make sure that the memory of the work and really the ideas of the artists live on in perpetuity in a place where they can never be forgotten, in a place where they are remembered by scholars, where people start writing books about the artist, where people are theorizing about the work at universities, in educational centers, where the next generation is questioning, why did this artist use blue instead of red? What was going on at the time that helped influence this palette? I think that's where I'm at. It's the memory work, collecting not from a place of acquisitions. Can you tell I'm passionate about this? Mm-hmm. It's collecting not from a place of acquisition or ownership, but from a place of memory work. Mm-hmm. You know?
Yes, I'm right there. Are you right there with her, dreaming? Are we dreaming together? I want to hear you guys, please. Yes. I like to live our new friends, you know, with some type of call to action. Yeah. When we live here, if we are an artist, if we are un animateur culturel, un propriétaire d'espace, un collectionneur ou quelqu'un qui est vraiment curieux de juste participer à la continuation, parce qu'il faut se rappeler qu'on n'a rien inventé, hein, on continue le travail qui a déjà été entamé. Quel genre de call to action qu'on pourrait partager?
Yeah, I would say support the artists that you believe in early. And if you don't have the financial wherewithal to do it, find 5 other friends who can come in with you and think about maybe commissioning the artist to do additioned work or to buy a piece, if only to do a share, or to create a shared collection. The thing about collecting is that often this word collector has felt very much like you need to be of a certain financial status, right? You need to look a certain way, you need to have a certain amount of knowledge to do it. I just want to call cap on that, right? Because our grandmothers have the original cabinet of curiosities in their living room. You know, like that plastic on the sofa, okay? They know how to keep things. That salon wall, well, that's your family album wall. These are all things that have to do with collecting. Collecting is not precious. It's something that we already know how to do. And what's more is that we are the creators of culture. So we don't need to wait until we go into a museum or go into a gallery to know what's hot, right? Like, do you wait to see something in a fashion show to dress yourself? And this is like a stylish crew, right? Like, we know what's good. So go into a studio, ask for a studio visit with artists that you admire, see what they're working on. Ask yourself, is it rigorous? Does it speak to my heart? Is this somebody that I really want to support? And then find a way. You can do it, like I said, by working with 5 other friends, or you can decide, I'm just going to keep on showing up to their exhibitions and I'm going to tell all my people about it. Maybe there's a curator in your midst that you should bring, or maybe you should host them for a dinner at your home. Ask most successful artists today how they've gotten their start, and it usually starts with somebody really taking a vested interest in their success and leveraging their cultural, their social, or their financial capital to make it possible. Mm-hmm. So that would be my advice, is to just get in there as much as you can and forget about any of the frameworks we've been taught, and instead come at it from a human approach.
That makes sense. Thank you. Alors, le sujet de la conversation, si je reviens au premier point, l'économie collective au service des artistes. innover pour financer et faire grandir sa créativité. Et dans tout ce qu'on vient de dire, qu'on vient de partager depuis 30 minutes, j'entends qu'il faut inclure beaucoup dans l'équation. Il ne faut pas oublier la solidarité, la bienveillance, la curiosité, s'intéresser à l'autre, l'amour de soi, la connaissance de soi. Est-ce que j'en oublie?
Non, pas du tout. En fin de compte, peut-être la dernière chose, c'est like rest. If I can talk about rest for a second, right? Like, I think that, you see how I started French there for a second? And then, okay, I'll get there. But
You stay another 24 hours and your sentence is going to be full in French.
I think it's rest. I think that, often we feel like our value is predicated on how much we produce, or at least that's how we've been told. And artists often also have that pressure, right? It's not about the maker. It's really about how much they can produce or how much they can sell. There's this statistic, at least that exists in the United States, that was conducted with the support of United States artists that showed that after a survey, 97% of people said they cared about art, and only 23% said that they care about artists.
Oh.
You see where I'm going with this, right?
Yeah.
This is just true, I think, of like a capitalist environment, or one where our success is often predicated on how much we make. But imagine if we did not feel like our labor had to be anything other than the thing that supports us, and that our identity or our creativity or our ability to be fully expressed, right, belong to us. So I would just say this idea of rest and of divesting of systems that aren't giving you what you need is really important. Rest as a strategy for political resistance, rest as a place where you can play, rest as a place where if you are being rewarded for making yellow dots, but you want to make green squares, you can feel as free to do that as possible. With our program commissioner, people sign up, but they don't know who the artist is that we're going to commission, and they don't know what the work is that we're going to commission. And part of the reason that we do it that way is because that element of surprise means that it's not you and 40 of your friends working toward acquiring an object. No, we have to level set that we're all in this together first. So it really places an emphasis on moving at the speed of trust first. And then we unveil who the artist is. And we do all this kind of storytelling around the artist because at the end of the day, you may or may not like the piece that you receive, but you will know why it's important. And you will respect the maker as to why they are relevant in this time in history. And then by the time we've done all that work, well, of course, you're going to love the piece, right? But I guess the last thing I want to center really is this idea of having the freedom to be fully expressed. And I do equate that for each one of us as finding the freedom to rest.
Thank you. Thank you. Oui. Alors, ce que je retiens de tout ce qu'on vient de partager, we're not done catching up, c'est que, en fait, l'économie collective au service des artistes, innover pour financer et faire grandir sa créativité, repose beaucoup à aimer les artistes autant qu'on aime leur art. Et ça va faire des communautés fortes et prospères. Si on peut résumer ainsi. Mais moi, j'aimerais... Ça, c'est mon dernier mot, mais je te laisse ton dernier mot.
Oh my God, thank you for... I've said so much. No, just thank you so much for inviting me to speak on something I feel so passionate about. And really that I am just so excited to kind of experiment and dig in more in this city. Like I said, we brought a group here a couple years ago, and I look forward to doing it soon and to doing it together.
Dejha Carrington. C'est votre tour. mon micro. Deux.
Ouais. Merci. Félicitations pour cet échange. Ma question est pour Dejha. Et j'en ai deux. La première, un artiste que tu as découvert de façon surprenante, que tu pourrais nous partager. Et deuxième question, tu parlais de rest. Qu'est-ce que toi tu fais qui te génère du rest et de la joie?
So, one of the artists who I've really come to enjoy was the work of a ski, Olivier Villers. And the way that I came to know them, I believe, is Présent, et Présent, à Présent, which was your company, was creating a Kickstarter. And as a result of supporting, one of the perks was a sweatshirt. And on the sweatshirt was the work by Olivier Villers. And I was like, wow, I just love these colors and this pattern making. And so when it came time to decide who we wanted to do studio visits with and what kind of creative process I was interested in, well, I was pointed toward an exhibition that Aski was having. I got the chance to see their work, and I brought some people with me from Detroit who I had invited, kind of for like a Montreal arts and cultural tour, because what I had noticed is there's a little bit of a dissonance between the people who make the work and the people who collect the work. And I had been told that there are more Black artists here who would like to see more Black collectors, and that bridging that gap was really important from a shared experience. And so when I was with my folks from Detroit, who I affectionately call the Whitakers, they just, from a very visceral perspective, fell in love with Aski's work. And then moving forward, fast forward maybe about a year later, when we had our trip to Montreal, I was able to bring all of these people who were visiting from Miami, LA, New York, and locals from Montreal who were participating to Aski's studio. From that, 3 sales came from the work itself. We created a series of tote bags, and of course, since he's been connected to a curator who I hope he'll have a chance to develop a relationship from. So it's really interesting that when you find a work or when you see something you like, you don't really know what direction it's going to go in, but if you just kind of stick with it, right, and inquire and stay curious. I like the sweatshirt. What's your studio like? I like the studio visit. You know, like you kind of find your way there. The same thing happened with Stanley Février. You know, I went to see his work when it was at the Contemporary Museum, the Fine Arts Museum. Really fell in love with it through a series of introductions, got to meet the person. The Whitakers were there. They ended up collecting and buying one of his pieces. And then, because they live in Detroit, they used their connections to have it shown at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit. And one of the things that Stanley had vocally said, right, was, I want to make sure my work belongs in the collection of Black folks. They heard that, and they knew what their duty was and what their responsibility was. So again, like when I say that, you know, collecting moves at the speed of trust, or we move at the speed of trust, it's these little moments of entanglement that I think create the sweetness for when we meet artists and people we really believe in. And I guess the second part of that question is, how do I rest? Oh, man. You know, I really love to hang out with my friends. So how I rest is really just by spending time with friends and family and traveling together. And I'm really still a very curious person when it comes to the arts. So I like to go to a gallery or to a museum just so I can observe. And I think for me, those are the times I feel most at peace, when I'm surrounded by people I love, inspired by what I'm looking at.
Merci. Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? Oui.
Hi. do you have any advice for like emerging artists that are trying to get like seen? Yeah, that would be my question.
Yeah, tons. Yeah, so I think the art world is a multiverse. But by a multiverse, what I mean by that is there are many different art worlds that exist. So to some degree, I think understanding what you want, whether you want to work with a gallery, whether you would like your work to be an institution, or whether you would prefer to sell directly to the market, is very important, because each one will present different financial opportunities and different creative opportunities. One of the things that I always advocate for are artist residencies as a way to connect with peers and also as a way to meet curators who will, speaking of the visual arts, curate you into group shows. The other thing that I think is really important to do is to connect with artists who are in your immediate environment and whose work you really respect and you see a kinship with. Because if the curator or if the fellowship or residency isn't coming in time, organize your own show. Organize your own show. Do your own thing. And invite all of the curators and all of the museum directors and everybody who should be in the room to that space. One of the things that was really interesting to me is when I was in Amsterdam, there's this artist who put out a speculative press release saying that they were starting a new museum where work that had been stolen from certain peoples was going to be repatriated back to them, and that 6 or 7 of the wealthiest collectors had agreed to participate and support that initiative. Now, it's speculative, so it was all make-believe, right? But people came to the announcement, the press announcement. And what was really interesting is that they all came ready to talk about how to repatriate the work, how to change systems, and how to create this new museum, this museum of Black futures that he was really presenting. And I guess the lesson is that if it doesn't already exist, you really have to make it. And sometimes, even if creating the conditions to have the conversation can be to your advantage. I participated in a Black collective called Seek Us, maybe about, 20 years ago, where, I wanted to do PR. My friend was in creative direction. Another one was a designer. Another one wanted to be a leader of an organization. And we produced our own show. It's really by doing that we almost created our own mixtape, where it gave us something to not just build a portfolio, but to organize ourselves and use that as a point of leverage for what would be our next opportunity. And that's something that I've had to do several times over in my career, every time I felt like I needed to pivot, or I wanted to rebrand, or the opportunity wasn't already coming, but I had the people around me and all the resources I needed to just kind of like shift the conversation. So I think those are the things, the residency, the organizing, and really creating your own platform for the path that you're interested in, that I could recommend most.
Merci. Je pense qu'on a le temps pour une dernière.
Bonjour. Déjà, merci beaucoup d'avoir pris le temps de partager votre expérience avec autant de passion. Je pense que je parle pour tout le monde. J'étais vraiment scotchée à vos lèvres pendant toute la conversation. Ma question est assez simple. Je voulais savoir quelle est l'impression qu'ont les visiteurs avec qui vous venez à Montréal, vous faites des visites de studio, etc. Quelle est leur impression principale, ou en tout cas leur première impression de la scène de l'art à Montréal, et qu'est-ce qu'ils trouvent le plus impressionnant, le plus intéressant? Et je pose cette question parce que je me demande de quelle façon est-ce que des artistes montréalais ou des gens qui travaillent dans le monde de l'art peuvent utiliser ça comme force pour ensuite opérer dans le reste du monde. Donc, comment utiliser cette force d'être montréalais, d'être artiste montréalais pour continuer à grandir. Merci.
Well, thank you for your generosity of spirit. I'm so happy to be here, and I think that's a beautiful question. Because one of the things that I observed from people is realizing that Montreal is not that far. You know, that we are just so much more connected geographically and culturally than people think. I think, you know, coming from the US, there's this idea of what Canada is like, and people really have no idea how incredible, how diverse, how full of possibility the city is. And often I think Black folks are looking to connect with other people from the community, and they just don't hear about the Black community from wherever they are. But it's not because we don't exist. I mean, clearly we do. But I just think that the narrative isn't there. You know, that's not the dominant narrative. So, you know, one of the things that I think people that I observed were really interested in was just seeing, like, just the incredible richness that is already here. And I think maybe one thing that we could work on together is shifting the narrative. So doing more storytelling that really speaks about a much more like local and personal experience, but also like our global Pan-African experience, right? Starting to create more strategies across borders, across movements, really, you know, across disciplines that take less of this, okay, this is my US strategy, this is my, like, you know, London strategy, and look at markets less from like this much more geographic and financially centered place, and think about it a little bit more from like, okay, let's just build across like all of these different lines. And I think we could probably all do a better job at like working together to shift that global narrative. You know, even at looking for articles about Montreal arts in the Art newspaper, which is a global paper that comes out of London, there's not enough stories. There's not enough stories. We need more writers here. We need more writers who are working with international publications. We need more stories being generated out of Montreal that speak truth and authenticity of the Montreal experience, but connect it to the global experience, because our experience is also global. So I think these are some of the things we can work on together.
Merci. Je vais prendre une dernière question.
Hi. Throughout the talk, you mentioned a lot about moving from Canada to US because you plateaued, and a lot of you doing pivots in your life and rebranding. And I guess my question is, one part, what is your strategy when it's time for you to pivot and change? And the second one is, once you got to the US, what was the journey? Did you have to start over again? And how was it for you to be able to be at the top of your field in Canada, but having to start over in the US? Thank you.
Yeah, I remember when I was telling you I fail a lot? Yeah. I had to start from scratch. I went from being a director at the National Film Board of Canada to not knowing one person who had been my pen pal in Miami. So no family, no friends, nothing. And moving into a small apartment on the beach, which, you know, not the worst thing in the middle of December, right? But it really went from me having a whole community here to not knowing more than one person in Miami. And the way that I did it was this idea of like the mixtape that I mentioned earlier. When I went on vacation in Miami during a little sabbatical that I had at the National Film Board, I approached Art Basel Miami Beach, which several of you might know is like one of the largest art fairs in the Western Hemisphere, and told them I would like to volunteer my support for a couple of days. The reason I didn't ask for an internship was A, because I didn't have any papers, and B, was because if I said I'd like to volunteer my time for a couple of hours, I felt like I might have more agency around saying what I actually wanted to do. And what I wanted to do at that time was be the lead publicist for the visual arts fairs. So they placed me in that department, and I had enough training and a unique skill set that I knew that if I just did the job for a couple of days, right, I could probably parlay my way into an opportunity, which is what happened. So I find myself at an immigration office 3 days later, getting a visa, and then coming back, getting boxes from Montreal, going to the border, and calling my boss at the National Film Board from a Friendlies in Vermont saying, I'm not coming back. And let me tell you, they were like, what do you mean? That's so irresponsible. That's so irresponsible. You should give more notice. And I was like, I'd love to, but can you give me a full-time position? Can you increase my salary? Can you give me a bonus? Well, that's not how it works. Well, friend. If that's not how it works, I don't know how it works. So that was a bye, okay? And then I did have to start from scratch in Miami. But in starting from scratch, I had a lot of experience doing that because I started from scratch in Montreal too. I mean, we all have started from scratch at a certain point, right? So it was just a matter of doing the work and staying focused on the work that I wanted to do and making sure that I was working on projects and with people who inspired me. And I think that often we look so far ahead, but really what we need to be doing is looking at like the next step. And the work will happen, you know, but I think there really needs to be a focus of being in the practice. And in terms of how to pivot, it's really doing that. When I wanted to pivot from being in communications to really being the ED or the principal of my own organization, I had to appoint myself. So I just changed my business card title and I put principal, executive director, founder, and I started introducing myself. And then I started doing that work. And 4 years into building commissioner, I eventually left that job as vice president of Young Arts and continued with that. At a certain point when I was in Miami as well, I wanted to do a lot more creative programming work. My friend Kelly Nunes, who is a creative director here with Black Hole and Age of Union, wanted to be known for his creative work. He wanted to get out of DJing. So we applied for a grant, got a Kickstarter together where a lot of people from Montreal contributed. We took over a building and redesigned the building using light projections and outdoor projections and created programming around it, a magazine around it, all to say that we built the thing that would allow us to flex the skills and then told the stories that we were interested in. And then all of a sudden, you know, people's minds expanded from just seeing me as the publicist that I was into also seeing me as a convener, a gatherer, a partnership builder, a leader, a creative director. So I think you really have to put all the chips on yourself at any given moment, because even with the titles, you know, they don't always shift the mindset. It's as if you yourself have to embody the person you want to be. And even if you're not there yet, I don't think it's a fake it till you make it. It's already in you. There's no faking. You just got to own it.